Mail-order bride finds only ashes. A one-armed cowboy helps her rebuild the stagecoach lurched to a stop, throwing Catherine forward against the worn leather seat. Dust clouds swirled through the window as she peered out at what should have been her new home. Instead of the bustling ranch her betrothed had described in his letters, she saw blackened timber frames reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The main house was gone, reduced to a pile of charred wood and ash. The barn stood partially collapsed, its remaining walls scorched and crumbling. She clutched the letters tighter, her hands trembling. 3 months of correspondence with Henry Dalton, a prosperous rancher who promised her a fresh start after the war had left her widowed and penniless in Boston. Now she stood in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, staring at ruins. The driver cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you sure this is the right place?" Catherine checked the address again, though she had memorized every word Henry had written. This was the Dalton Ranch, or what remained of it. Her throat tightened as she stepped down from the coach, her boots sinking into the ash-covered ground. "Wait here," she told the driver, moving toward the destruction. Maybe Henry was in town. Maybe he was staying with neighbors after the fire. Maybe there was an explanation that would make sense of this nightmare. A figure emerged from behind the ruined barn, and Catherine's breath caught. The man was tall and lean, his right sleeve pinned up where his arm should have been. He wore a battered hat pulled low, and a revolver hung at his hip. His face was weathered and hard, with a thick scar running from his cheekbone to his jaw. "You need to leave," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Nothing here for anyone anymore." "I'm looking for Henry Dalton," Catherine said, straighting her spine. She had not traveled 2,000 miles to be frightened away by a scarred stranger. The man's jaw tightened. "Henry's dead. Burned in the fire 2 weeks ago." The words hit her like a physical blow. Catherine swayed, grabbing onto a charred fence post for support. Dead. Her last hope gone before she had even met him. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am, but you should go back where you came from." The man turned away, dismissing her. "I have nowhere to go," Catherine heard herself say. The truth of it burned worse than the devastation around her. She had sold everything to pay for the journey west. Her family was gone, her home lost to debt. "I'm Catherine Miller. Henry and I were to be married." The man stopped, his shoulders stiffening. When he turned back, something had shifted in his expression. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition of a fellow survivor. "Jake Coleman," he said finally. "I worked for Henry. Foreman here for 5 years until the fire." "What happened?" Jake's face darkened. "Raiders. Same gang that's been terrorizing ranches up and down the territory. They came at night, set fires, shot anyone who got in their way. Henry tried to stop them." He paused, his hand unconsciously moving to his missing arm. Lost this trying to pull him out wasn't enough. Catherine looked around at the destruction with new eyes. This was not an accident or an act of nature. Someone had deliberately destroyed her future, murdered the man who had offered her hope. "The law?" she asked. Jake laughed, a bitter sound. "Sheriff is 3 days' ride away, and he has his hands full. These raiders move fast, strike hard, and disappear into the mountains. They have been doing this for months." The stagecoach driver called out, "Ma'am, I need to move on. You coming or staying?" Catherine looked at the ruins, then at Jake Coleman. Something fierce awakened in her chest, something that had been sleeping since her first husband died at Gettysburg. She had survived war, poverty, and loss. She would not let faceless raiders steal her future without a fight. "Staying," she called back. Jake's eyes widened. "You cannot be serious." "There is nothing here. There is land," Catherine said. "And apparently there is a fight. Henry offered me a partnership in this ranch." "I intend to honor that agreement. Henry is dead. Then I will rebuild it in his memory." She met Jake's gaze without flinching. "Unless you plan to shoot me, Mr. Coleman, I am not leaving." For a long moment they stood in the ashen ruins, 2 strangers bound by loss and determination. Finally, Jake shook his head. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met, or the most foolish. Perhaps both," Catherine said. "Now, where do we start?" The afternoon sun beat down on the destroyed ranch as Catherine surveyed the damage with Jake. Most of the livestock had been scattered or stolen. The main house was a total loss, but Jake had been living in a small line shack on the far edge of the property that the raiders had missed. The water well was intact, and some of the fencing could be salvaged. "We will need supplies," Jake said, his tone suggesting he still thought she would come to her senses and leave. "Tools, lumber, nails, food. The nearest town is Copper Ridge, half a day's ride." "Then we should go tomorrow," Catherine said, already making mental calculations. She had a small amount of money left, enough for basic supplies if she was careful. Jake stopped walking and faced her directly. Miss Miller, you do not understand what you are getting into. Those raiders will come back. They always do. And when they find out someone is trying to rebuild here, they will make sure it does not happen. Good, Catherine said quietly. Then we will be ready for them. Something flickered in Jake's eyes, respect mixed with concern. Henry told me about you in his letters. Said you survived the war in Boston, kept a boarding house running when all the men were gone. He said you were strong. He was kind in his words. Maybe. Or maybe he saw something true. Jake adjusted his hat with his one hand, a gesture Catherine would come to recognize as him thinking hard about something. If you are serious about this, we need more than just the two of us. We need hands who can work and who can fight. Can we afford to hire anyone? Henry had some money hidden. The raiders did not find everything. Jake led her to what had been the barn's foundation. He knelt and pulled aside a burned board, revealing a metal box buried in the dirt. Inside was a leather pouch heavy with gold coins. He was saving this, called it his emergency fund. Catherine stared at the gold, thinking of the man she would never meet who would still, in death, provided for her. We use it wisely, then, for the ranch and for protection. As the sun began to set, painting the ruined ranch in shades of orange and red, Catherine felt the weight of what she had chosen. But beneath the fear was something else, something she had not felt in years. Purpose. The night brought cold and the sound of coyotes howling in the distance. Catherine sat by the small fire Jake had built outside the line shack, wrapped in a blanket Henry would never see her use. Tomorrow they would ride to town. Tomorrow the real work would begin. But tonight, in the darkness and ash, Catherine Miller made a silent promise to the man who had offered her hope and to herself. This ranch would rise again, and anyone who tried to stop her would learn that a Boston widow had more fight in her than they could imagine. Jake sat across the fire, cleaning his revolver with practiced ease despite having only one hand. He had not asked her again to leave. Perhaps he understood, as she did, that some fights chose you whether you wanted them or not. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant and cold in the Wyoming sky. Catherine thought of the letters Henry had sent, describing this land and his dreams for it. She would see those dreams realized, or she would die trying. Morning came with frost on the ground and the smell of coffee brewing over the fire. Jake had been up before dawn, his face grim as he saddled the 2 horses that remained on the property. Catherine changed into riding clothes she had brought, practical garments that shocked Jake when he saw them. Boston has changed, he muttered, handing her the reins of a gray mare. The ride to Copper Ridge took them through rolling hills and across streams still running with snowmelt from the mountains. Catherine's body ached from the stagecoach journey, but she refused to show weakness. Jake set a steady pace, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Raiders usually strike at night, he said when he noticed her watching him. But they have scouts during the day. If they see us, they will know someone is back at the Dalton place. Let them know, Catherine said. Better they come when we are expecting them than when we are not. Jake gave her a sharp look. You have been in a fight before. It was not a question, but Catherine answered anyway. The war came to Boston in different ways. Riots, shortages, desperate men who thought a widow alone was easy prey. I learned to defend myself. They rode in silence after that, but Catherine felt Jake's reassessment of her. She was not what he expected, and that suited her fine. Exceeding expectations had kept her alive this long. Copper Ridge appeared as the sun reached its peak, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a main street. The town was rough and worn, serving the scattered ranches and mining operations in the territory. Catherine noticed the way people stopped and stared as they rode in, particularly at her. Not many women come through here, Jake explained quietly. And even fewer stay. They tied the horses outside the general store, and Catherine felt every eye on her as they climbed the steps. Inside, a heavy-set man with mutton chops looked up from behind the counter, his expression shifting from curiosity to surprise when he recognized Jake. Coleman? Heard you were dead with Henry Dalton.
Not quite, Jake said.
Need supplies? Lumber, nails, tools, food staples for 2? The shopkeeper's eyes shifted to Catherine. And who might this be? Catherine Miller, she said before Jake could answer. I was engaged to Henry Dalton. I have come to rebuild the ranch. The store went quiet. Even the 2 other customers stopped their browsing to stare. Ma'am, the shopkeeper said slowly. I do not mean to speak ill, but that ranch is cursed. Those raiders, they do not want anyone on that land. They have hit it twice now, and they will hit it again. Then we will be ready, Catherine said, pulling out Henry's gold. Now, about those supplies. The shopkeeper looked at Jake, who nodded slightly. Your funeral, he said, but he started gathering what they needed. While Jake worked with the shopkeeper on the list, Catherine wandered the store. She found herself studying a gun display, revolvers and rifles arranged behind glass. You know how to use one of those? A voice asked behind her. Catherine turned to find a young woman, perhaps 20, with auburn hair and sharp green eyes. She wore men's clothes and had a confidence that matched Catherine's own. I can learn, Catherine said. The woman smiled. Name's Lucy Harper. My father runs the saloon down the street. I heard what you said about rebuilding the Dalton Ranch. That takes guts, or foolishness, according to most people. Maybe both. Lucy leaned against the counter, studying Catherine with open curiosity. Those raiders, they are not just thieves. They are organized, well-armed, and they have someone smart leading them. They hit hard and fast, always knowing when a place is vulnerable. You seem to know a lot about them. Lucy's expression hardened. They killed my brother 6 months ago when they raided his claim up in the mountains. Sheriff did nothing.
Law does nothing.
So we are left to fend for ourselves. Catherine felt a kinship with the stranger, another woman who had lost someone to the same faceless violence. I am planning to fight back, she said quietly. When they come again, I intend to be ready. Then you will need more than just Coleman, Lucy said. He is good in a fight, from what I hear, but one man and one woman against a gang of raiders? You need an army. I will take what I can get. Lucy was quiet for a moment, then made a decision. There are people in this territory who would help if they thought there was a real chance. Folks who are tired of being terrorized, who want to fight but do not want to do it alone. You start showing them it is possible to stand up to these raiders, and you might be surprised who comes to your side. Before Catherine could respond, the door burst open. A young man stumbled in, blood streaming from a wound on his head. They hit the Morrison Ranch, he gasped. Burned it to the ground an hour ago. Killed Morrison and his 2 sons. His wife barely escaped. The store erupted in angry murmurs. Jake appeared at Catherine's side, his face grim. We need to go, he said, now. But Catherine was looking at the wounded messenger, at Lucy's furious expression, at the fear and anger on every face in the store. The raiders were not just a threat to her ranch, they were a plague on this entire territory. How many ranches have they hit? She asked the room. 8 in the last 4 months, the shopkeeper said. 12 people dead. Hundreds of cattle stolen or scattered. They are bleeding us dry. Catherine made a decision that would change everything. Then we stop running. We stop hiding. We start fighting back. With what army? Someone called out. With whoever is brave enough to stand, Catherine said, her voice carrying through the store. I am rebuilding the Dalton Ranch, and when those raiders come for me, I will be ready. Anyone who wants to join me, anyone who is tired of living in fear, you know where to find me. She turned to the shopkeeper. Load those supplies. We have work to do. As they left the store, Jake grabbed her arm. You just painted a target on your back. The target was already there, Catherine said. Now I am just making sure everyone knows I am not running. The ride back to the ranch was tense, both of them scanning the hills for signs of the raiders. Jake seemed torn between admiration and frustration. You do not know what you have started, he said as they approached the burned-out buildings. Yes, I do, Catherine replied. I have started a war, and I intend to win it. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Lucy Harper arrived on horseback, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. Behind her came 3 men, rough-looking ranch hands who Jake recognized. Boys? Jake said, surprised. What are you doing here? The oldest of the 3, a grizzled man with gray in his beard, spit tobacco juice into the dirt. Heard what the lady said in town yesterday. We worked for Morrison. Got nothing left now that the ranch is ashes. Figured we would throw in with someone who has the guts to fight back. His companions nodded agreement. They were hard men, weathered by the frontier, and they looked at Catherine with a mix of skepticism and hope. Can you shoot? Catherine asked. Better than most, the gray-bearded man said. Name's Pete Carson. This here is Danny Mills and Frank Cooper. We have been working cattle in this territory for 15 years. We know how to handle trouble. Lucy dismounted, tying her horse to the remaining fence post. My father does not know I am here. He would skin me alive if he did. but I brought what I could from the saloon stores. Figured you would need it. Catherine felt something shift in her chest. These people, strangers until yesterday, were willing to risk everything to stand with her. It was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. We rebuild the barn first, Jake said, taking charge of the practical matters. We need shelter for the animals we are going to reclaim and a defensible position if the raiders come. Then we work on the house. The work began immediately. Pete and his men proved invaluable, their experience with construction evident in every movement. Lucy worked alongside them without complaint, her strength surprising the men until they stopped commenting on it. Catherine threw herself into the labor, ignoring the blisters forming on her hands and the ache in her muscles. By nightfall, they had cleared away most of the debris and begun laying the foundation for a new barn. Jake had designed it with defense in mind, positioning it to provide cover and sight lines across the property. As they sat around the fire that night, sharing a meal Lucy had prepared, Pete voiced what everyone was thinking. Those raiders are going to hear about this. About all of us being here, rebuilding. They will come. I am counting on it, Catherine said. But this time, we will not be caught by surprise. This time, we fight. Danny, the youngest of the 3 ranch hands, looked nervous. Ma'am, begging your pardon, but there are maybe 20 of them. 6 of us is not much of a fighting force. Then we make every shot count, Jake said, his scarred face illuminated by the firelight. We choose the ground, we prepare our defenses, and we make them pay for every inch they try to take. Lucy leaned forward, her eyes bright with determination. My brother tried to fight them alone. That was his mistake. But together, with a plan, we have a chance. The conversation turned to strategy and tactics. Jake, it turned out, had been a sergeant in the cavalry before losing his arm. Pete had fought in the war as well. Between them, they began to formulate a defense that might work. We need to know when they are coming, Frank said. Some kind of early warning. I can ride out tomorrow, Danny offered. Scout the surrounding ranches, see if anyone has seen signs of the raiders. Maybe we can find their pattern, figure out when they will strike next. Catherine listened to it all, her mind racing. These people had placed their faith in her determination to stand against the raiders. She could not let them down. As the fire burned low and the others settled in for sleep, Catherine walked to the edge of the property, looking out at the dark hills. Somewhere out there, the raiders were planning their next attack. Let them come, she thought. Let them come and find out what happens when people stop running and start fighting. Jake appeared beside her, silent as a ghost. You should rest. Tomorrow will be another hard day. I keep thinking about Henry, Catherine said. About what he must have felt when the raiders came, when he realized he could not stop them. He was a good man, Jake said quietly. He deserved better than what he got. We all do, Catherine replied. But deserving and getting are 2 different things. I have learned that the hard way. They stood together in the darkness, 2 survivors bound by loss and the determination to ensure no one else suffered the same fate. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow they would start building something worth defending. But tonight, under the vast Wyoming sky, Catherine allowed herself a moment of doubt. What if she was wrong? What if her determination only led these good people to their deaths? What if she was not strong enough to see this through? Then she thought of the letters from Henry, of the hope he had offered her, of the future the raiders had stolen. No, she decided. There was no room for doubt. There was only the fight ahead, and the will to win it. Get some rest, Jake, she said. We have a ranch to rebuild and a war to win. As she walked back to the line shack, Catherine did not see the figure watching from the distant hills. A scout for the raiders reporting back that the Dalton ranch was occupied again. The message would reach the gang's leader by morning, and decisions would be made. The war Catherine had declared was about to become very real. 3 weeks passed in a blur of back-breaking work and careful planning. The barn rose from the ashes, stronger than before, with reinforced walls and firing positions built into its design. The house foundation was laid, though they focused their efforts on making the barn livable and defensible first. Danny's scouting missions revealed a pattern. The raiders struck roughly every 2 weeks, always at night, always hitting isolated ranches with few hands to defend them. By his calculations, the Dalton ranch was overdue for another attack. More people arrived to help. 2 brothers who had lost their ranch to the raiders, a Mexican vaquero named Carlos who had survived 3 attacks on different spreads, and an older woman named Ruth who had been a nurse during the war and insisted they would need medical skills when the fighting started. Each person brought skills and determination, turning the burned-out ranch into something resembling a small fort. Catherine worked harder than anyone, refusing to let her gender or inexperience slow her down. Jake taught her to shoot, and she proved to be a natural, her hands steady and her aim improving with each practice session. Lucy showed her how to reload quickly, how to maintain the weapons, how to move and fight like someone who expected to survive. "You are tougher than you look," Lucy said one afternoon as they practiced quick drawing from concealment. "I have had to be," Catherine replied, hitting the target they had set up with 3 quick shots. That night, Danny returned from a scouting run with news that turned everyone's blood cold. The raiders had struck the Henderson Ranch, just 15 miles away. The family had fled before the attack, warned by a neighbor, but their home and barn were ash. "They are moving this direction," Jake said, studying the crude map they had drawn of the territory. "Henderson's place is the closest ranch to ours. We are next." "How long?" Catherine asked. "Could be tonight. Could be a week. But they are coming." The group gathered in the barn, their faces grim in the lamplight. They had worked hard to prepare, but now that the moment was approaching, the reality of what they faced settled over them like a heavy blanket. "We need a plan," Pete said. "A real one. Not just hoping we can shoot our way through." Jake stood, his one arm gesturing to the map. "They will come from the south, using the creek bed for cover. It is what I would do. Danny, you and Frank position yourselves here and here, in the rocks overlooking the approach. You will be our early warning. When you see them coming, you fire 1 shot and fall back to the barn." He pointed to different positions. "Pete, you take the hayloft with the rifle. Best range and cover. Carlos, you are on the west wall. Ruth, you stay in the line shack with the medical supplies and extra ammunition. Lucy and Catherine, you are with me on the main floor, ready to reinforce wherever they hit hardest." "What about the house foundation?" Carlos asked in his accented English. "They could use it for cover." "We rig it with traps," Jake said. "Nothing fancy, just obstacles to slow them down and make noise if they try to use it." They spent the next 2 days preparing. Trenches were dug, firing positions reinforced, and what little they could spare was invested in ammunition and supplies. Catherine found herself working alongside people who had become more than allies. They were becoming family, bound by shared purpose and the knowledge that they would soon be fighting for their lives. On the 3rd night, Catherine was jolted awake by a single gunshot echoing across the valley. Danny's warning. She was on her feet instantly, grabbing a rifle and revolver as the barn erupted into controlled chaos. Everyone moved to their positions with practiced efficiency, the result of the drills Jake had insisted they run every day. Jake appeared at her side, his face hard in the moonlight. "This is it. Remember your training. Aim for center mass. Do not waste ammunition. And stay behind cover." Catherine nodded, her mouth dry but her hands steady. She positioned herself at a gap in the barn wall that provided a clear field of fire while offering protection. Lucy settled in beside her, her own rifle ready. "Scared?" Lucy whispered. "Terrified," Catherine admitted. "You?" "Same. But I would rather die fighting than live on my knees." They did not have to wait long. Dark figures emerged from the creek bed, at least 15 of them, moving with the confidence of men who had done this many times before. They spread out as they approached, obviously intending to surround the barn and set it alight like they had the house. "Hold," Jake commanded quietly, his voice carrying to each position. "Let them get close. Make every shot count." The raiders moved closer, and Catherine could make out individual features now. Hard men with guns and torches, their faces shadowed by hat brims. They thought this would be easy, another defenseless ranch to burn and loot. They were about to learn otherwise. "Now!" Jake shouted. The night exploded with gunfire. Pete's rifle cracked from the hayloft, dropping one of the raiders instantly. Carlos and Jake opened up from their positions, their shots deliberate and deadly. Catherine aimed at a man carrying a torch and squeezed the trigger, feeling the rifle kick against her shoulder. The man went down, his torch falling into the dirt. The raiders scattered, caught completely by surprise. They had expected resistance, perhaps, but not this level of coordination and firepower. Return fire slammed into the barn walls, but the reinforced structure held. "They are flanking!" Danny shouted from his position, and Catherine saw movement to the west. 3 raiders were trying to circle around to the blind side of the barn. "Lucy with me!" Catherine shouted, abandoning her position and running to the west wall. They arrived just as the raiders reached the foundation of the old house, and the traps Jake had set there did their work. A raider stepped on concealed planks studded with nails and went down screaming. His companions hesitated, and that hesitation cost them. Lucy's rifle barked twice, and 2 more men fell. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The raiders, realizing they had walked into a prepared defense, began to fall back. Their leader, a tall man with a black hat, shouted orders, trying to rally his men. Jake saw him and raised his revolver with practiced ease, firing 3 quick shots. The leader stumbled but did not fall, retreating with his surviving men into the darkness of the creek bed. "Cease fire," Jake commanded. "Save your ammunition." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the moans of wounded raiders left behind. Catherine's ears rang from the gunfire, and her hands shook as the adrenaline began to fade. She had shot a man. Possibly killed him. The reality of it hit her like a physical blow. "You did good," Lucy said, gripping her shoulder. "You saved lives tonight." Jake moved through the barn, checking on everyone. Miraculously, no one on their side had been seriously hurt. A few minor wounds from splinters and ricochets, nothing Ruth could not handle. But outside, 5 raiders lay dead or dying, and blood trails showed that others had been wounded. "They will be back," Pete said, reloading his rifle. "And they will be angry." "Let them be angry," Jake said. "They just learned that the Dalton Ranch is not an easy target anymore. Word will spread." As dawn broke over the ranch, they surveyed the aftermath. The raiders had left their dead behind in their hasty retreat, a sign of just how badly the fight had gone for them. Catherine stood in the growing light, looking at the barn they had defended, the land they had held. "We won," she said, hardly believing it. "We survived the first round," Jake corrected. "But you were right about one thing. We can fight back. We can win." The bodies were buried before noon, simple graves on the edge of the property marked only by stones. Ruth said a few words over them, because even in death, every man deserved that much dignity. As they stood over the graves, a rider appeared on the horizon. Danny called out a challenge, his rifle ready, but the rider raised his hands in peace. It was the sheriff from Copper Ridge, a heavy-set man named Bill Hawkins, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He rode into the ranch slowly, taking in the signs of battle with a practiced eye. "Heard there was trouble out here," he said, dismounting. "Heard it from 3 different sources by noon yesterday. The whole territory is talking about it. The raiders attacked," Jake said. "We defended our property." Hawkins looked at the graves, then at the small group of defenders. 5 dead raiders. "You must have given them hell." "We gave them what they deserved," Catherine said, stepping forward. "They murdered Henry Dalton and tried to kill the rest of us. We had every right to defend ourselves." The sheriff studied her with tired eyes. "I am not here to arrest anyone, Miss Miller. Truth be told, I am glad someone finally stood up to those animals. But you need to understand what you have started. This gang, they are led by a man named Victor Kane. He is mean as a snake and twice as dangerous. He will not let this go." "Good," Catherine said. "Because neither will we." Hawkins shook his head. "You are either the bravest people I have ever met or the most foolish. Either way, you have my respect." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Official, I cannot do much. I have 100 square miles to cover and not enough deputies. But unofficial, if you need help, send word. There are men in Copper Ridge who would ride out here if they knew they were backing a real fight." "We will keep that in mind," Jake said. After the sheriff left, the group gathered in the barn. The victory, such as it was, had energized everyone, but it had also made the danger terrifyingly real. "We need more people," Pete said, "and more guns. And better defenses," Carlos added. "They will not make the same mistakes twice." Catherine listened to them plan and strategize, feeling the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders. These people had followed her into battle, had risked their lives because she had inspired them to stand. She could not let them down. Over the next week, more people arrived. Word of the successful defense spread through the territory like wildfire, and those who had been living in fear saw hope for the first time. A family who had lost everything to the raiders arrived with a wagon and 2 teenagers old enough to shoot. An old trapper who knew the mountains better than anyone offered to scout for the raiders' camp. Even a few men from Copper Ridge showed up, offering their guns and their time. The ranch transformed from a simple defensive position into something more. A rallying point, a symbol that the raiders could be beaten. Jake pulled Catherine aside one evening as the sun set over the growing community. "You know they will come with everything they have next time. Kane will not tolerate this challenge to his control." "I know," Catherine said, "but we are ready. Or as ready as we can be." "Henry would be proud of what you have done here," Jake said quietly. "He always believed in standing for something, even when it cost everything." You are living that dream for him. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. I just wish he had lived to see it. Maybe he does, Jake said. Maybe this is his legacy, built by your hands. That night, Catherine wrote a letter by lamplight, addressed to her sister in Boston. She told her about the ranch, about the fight, about the people who had become her family. She told her that she had found something worth fighting for, worth dying for if it came to that. She did not know if the letter would ever be sent, but writing it helped clarify her thoughts. She was no longer Catherine Miller, the widow from Boston looking for a fresh start. She was Catherine Miller, rancher and fighter, leader of a rebellion against tyranny. The transformation was complete. As she sealed the letter, gunshots echoed in the distance. Not close, but not far either. The raiders were still out there, and the war was far from over. But for the first time since arriving at the burned-out ranch, Catherine felt truly alive. The real fight was just beginning. The attack came 3 nights later, and it was nothing like the first raid. Victor Kane had brought his entire gang, maybe 30 men, and they came prepared for a real fight. Danny spotted them an hour before sunset, a massive force moving through the hills with military precision. They are not trying to surprise us this time, Jake said, watching through a spyglass from the barn's upper window. They are making a statement. Overwhelming force to crush us completely. The defenders had grown to 20 people, but they were still outnumbered. Catherine stood in the barn, looking at the faces of those who had chosen to stand with her. Young and old, experienced and green, they all shared the same determined expression. We cannot win a straight fight, Pete said bluntly. Not against those numbers. Then we do not fight straight, Catherine said, an idea forming. Jake, how long until full dark? 2 hours, maybe less. Then we evacuate the barn. Now. Everyone to the line shack and the rocks beyond. We let them have the barn. The room erupted in protests, but Catherine raised her hand. Listen to me. They expect us to defend this barn to the death. It is what we did last time, but if we are not here, if we let them surround an empty building while we position ourselves in the rocks and high ground, we turn the trap on them. Jake's eyes widened as he understood. We let them commit to attacking the barn, and then we hit them from behind. Catch them in a crossfire with no cover. Exactly, Catherine said. It is risky, but it is the only chance we have. It is suicide if they figure it out before we spring the trap, Ruth said. Then we make sure they do not figure it out, Lucy said, her eyes bright with dangerous excitement. We leave lights burning in the barn. Make it look occupied. Maybe have a couple of people create noise, make them think we are all here. Then when they are committed, those decoys slip out the back and we all open fire. The plan was desperate and dangerous, but as Jake pointed out, so was their entire situation. They spent the next hour in frantic preparation, moving supplies and ammunition to the rocks, setting up firing positions with clear lines of sight to the barn. Catherine and Lucy volunteered to be the decoys, a decision that Jake fought against until Catherine made it clear the discussion was over. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky blood red, everyone except Catherine and Lucy moved to their positions. The 2 women stayed in the barn, keeping lamps lit and occasionally moving past windows to create shadows. From a distance, it would look like the defenders were preparing for another siege. Kane's men approached with the setting sun at their backs, spreading out to surround the barn completely. Catherine watched them through a gap in the wall, her heart pounding. There were so many of them, hard-faced men with rifles and revolvers, some carrying torches. Think this'll work? Lucy whispered beside her. It has to, Catherine said. Because if it does not, we are all dead. They kept up the deception until the raiders were in position, a complete circle around the barn with nowhere to retreat except back the way they had come. That was when Catherine saw him. Victor Kane himself, sitting tall in his saddle at the south end of the circle. Even from a distance she could see the cold fury on his face. Time to go, Lucy said, and they slipped out the small back door they had left unsealed, running low and fast toward the rocks where the others waited. Kane's voice carried across the valley. You in the barn, you have one chance to surrender. Come out now, and we will let some of you live. Silence greeted his offer. Catherine reached the rocks and took her position, her rifle trained on the massive raiders surrounding the barn. Your choice, Kane shouted. Burn them out. Raiders with torches moved forward, and that was when Jake gave the signal. A single shot from Pete's rifle, and then the night erupted with gunfire from 3 sides. The raiders, caught completely exposed and in crossfire, panicked. Men fell, horses screamed, and chaos consumed their organized formation. Kane tried to rally them, his voice cutting through the confusion, but his men were breaking. They had expected a siege, a slow burning out of defenders. Instead, they were being cut down from positions they could not see by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. "Fall back!" Kane finally shouted, and his men needed no second urging. They retreated toward the creek bed, leaving dead and wounded behind, their torches dropped and extinguished in the dirt. But Jake had one more surprise. Carlos and Danny had positioned themselves along the creek bed during the evacuation, and as the raiders fled into what they thought was safety, they found more guns waiting. The retreat became a rout, raiders running in every direction just trying to escape the killing zone. Kane himself took a bullet in the shoulder, reeling in his saddle but managing to stay mounted. He looked back at the ranch, at the barn that had been a trap, and even from a distance Catherine could see the hatred on his face. Then he spurred his horse and fled with the remnants of his gang. When silence finally fell, Catherine stood up from behind the rocks, hardly believing they had survived. The ground around the barn was littered with bodies and abandoned weapons. Of the 30 men Kane had brought, at least 15 were dead or too wounded to flee. The defenders emerged from their positions, faces shocked and grim. They had won again, but the cost was visible in the carnage around them. 2 of their own had been hit, both with minor wounds that Ruth immediately attended to. "We did it," someone said, their voice filled with wonder. "We survived," Jake corrected, his face hard. "But Kane got away. He will not forgive this. He will not forget." Catherine walked among the fallen raiders, feeling sick at the death but knowing it had been necessary. These men had chosen their path, had murdered and burned their way across the territory. This was justice, however brutal. She found herself standing at the spot where Kane had sat his horse, looking at the blood trail that marked his retreat. "This ends only one way," she said to Jake, who had joined her. "We have to find their camp. We have to end this permanently. That is a death sentence," Jake said, "going after them in their stronghold." "Letting them come back again and again is also a death sentence," Catherine replied, "but at least this way we choose the terms." The old trapper, a man called Nathaniel, stepped forward. "I can find their camp. Been tracking through these mountains for 40 years. Kane is holed up somewhere in the high country, but I can track him." "Then we take the fight to them," Pete said, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Over the next week, they prepared for the most dangerous gambit yet. Nathaniel scouted the mountains, following the raiders' trail. He returned with news that Kane's camp was in a narrow canyon, easily defended but with limited escape routes. "It is a fortress," Nathaniel said, drawing a map in the dirt, "but it is also a trap. If we can block the canyon entrance and attack from above, we can pin them." "How many men does he have left?" Jake asked. "Maybe 15, from what I could see, plus Kane himself." The numbers were almost even now, but the raiders would have the advantage of position and familiarity with the terrain. It would take careful planning and more than a little luck to pull off an assault. Catherine gathered the group that night for a final council. "This is voluntary," she said. "Anyone who wants to stay here and defend the ranch, I understand, but I am going after Kane. This has to end." Every single person volunteered to go. Even Ruth, who insisted they would need medical skills in the field. The next morning, they left a handful of the newest arrivals to guard the ranch and set out into the mountains, with Nathaniel as their guide. The journey took 2 days of hard riding through increasingly rugged terrain. They left their horses a mile from the canyon and proceeded on foot, splitting into 3 groups. Jake would lead the frontal assault with half their force, drawing the raiders' attention. Pete and Carlos would position themselves on the canyon rim with rifles, providing covering fire. Catherine, Lucy, and a few others would work their way around to the back of the canyon, looking for another way in. As the sun set on the second day, they were in position. Catherine could see the raiders' camp below, fires burning and men moving about with the confidence of those who thought themselves safe. Kane was there, his arm in a sling, gesturing angrily as he spoke to his lieutenants. Jake's group waited until full dark, then opened fire on the canyon entrance. The raiders scrambled for cover as bullets ricocheted off the canyon walls. Kane shouted orders, organizing a defense, unaware that this was exactly what the attackers wanted. While the raiders focused on the threat in front of them, Catherine led her group down a narrow game trail on the canyon's far side. It was treacherous work in the darkness, every step risking a fall that could break bones or worse. But Lucy had brought rope, and they made slow, steady progress. They emerged inside the raiders' camp from the direction of the horses, and the surprise was total. Catherine fired her rifle at a raider who turned to face her, and he went down. Lucy was beside her, her own gun barking, and suddenly the raiders were caught between 2 forces with nowhere to run. Kane saw them and his face contorted with rage. He drew his revolver with his good hand and fired at Catherine, the bullet passing so close she felt the wind of it. She returned fire, hitting him in the leg, and he went down cursing. The battle was short and brutal. The raiders, caught in a pincer with no reinforcements and no escape, fought desperately but were overwhelmed. Within minutes it was over. The survivors, including Kane, threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Catherine approached Kane where he lay bleeding on the ground. His eyes held hatred and pain in equal measure. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," he spat. "We are not like you," Catherine said. "You will stand trial for your crimes. Every murder, every burned home, every life you destroyed, justice will be done." Kane laughed bitterly. "Justice? In this territory, you are fooling yourself. They will call you heroes for a week, then forget about you. This land does not care about justice." "Then we will make it care," Catherine said, and turned away from him. They bound the prisoners and made camp for the night. In the morning, they would begin the long journey back to Copper Ridge with their captives. The sheriff would have to listen now. They had ended the reign of terror that had plagued the territory. As Catherine sat by the fire that night, watching the stars emerge overhead, Jake settled beside her. "You did it," he said. "You ended it. We did it," Catherine corrected. "All of us together. Henry would be proud." Catherine thought about the man she had never met, whose letters had brought her west, whose death had started this whole chain of events. "I like to think he is." The journey back to Copper Ridge took 3 days. Word of their victory spread ahead of them, and when they rode into town with their prisoners, a crowd had gathered. The sheriff took custody of Kane and his men with a mix of relief and respect. "You folks have done more for law and order in this territory than I have managed in 5 years, Hawkins said. "There will be a trial, a real one, and justice will be served." True to his word, the trial was held within a week. Evidence was presented, witnesses testified, and Kane and his surviving raiders were sentenced to hang. The executions were carried out on a cold morning with half the territory watching. Catherine did not attend. She was back at the ranch helping to raise the walls of the new house. The barn was finished and full of cattle they had reclaimed or purchased with reward money the territory had pooled together. The ranch was alive again, prospering even. People continued to arrive, some to help with the work, others just to see the place where ordinary people had stood up to tyranny and won. The Dalton Ranch became famous throughout Wyoming and beyond, a symbol of frontier justice and determination. Lucy decided to stay, becoming Catherine's partner in running the ranch. Pete and his men signed on permanently, as did Carlos and several others. Ruth established a small clinic in the line shack, treating ailments and injuries for anyone in the territory who needed help. Jake stayed too, though he sometimes talked about moving on, but he never did. The ranch had become his home as much as Catherine's. One evening, 6 months after the final battle with Kane, Catherine stood on the porch of the completed house, looking out over the land. The setting sun painted everything golden, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing peacefully. The barn stood strong and new, and smoke rose from the chimneys of several smaller buildings that had been added as the ranch community grew. Jake joined her on the porch, as had become his habit at sunset. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 survivors who had found peace after war. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked. "Coming here, I mean." Everything that happened. Catherine thought about Boston, about the life she had left behind, about the comfortable future she might have had if she had made different choices. Then she thought about what she had built here, the people she had saved, the community that had formed around the ranch. "Not for a second," she said. "This is home." In the distance, a rider approached. As they got closer, Catherine recognized Danny, returning from a supply run to Copper Ridge. He waved, a smile on his young face, and Catherine waved back. The ranch would continue to grow. More buildings would be added, more cattle raised, more people welcomed into their community. The story of the mail-order bride who found only ashes and rebuilt an empire would be told and retold, growing with each telling. But Catherine knew the truth of it. It was not just her story. It was the story of every person who had stood with her, who had fought beside her, who had refused to accept that might made right. It was the story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, because they had no other choice. As the stars emerged overhead and the ranch settled into the peaceful rhythm of evening, Catherine felt Henry's presence almost as if he stood beside her. She had never met him, never heard his voice or felt his touch. But his legacy lived on in every board of the barn, every stone of the house, every person who had found hope and purpose here. "Thank you," she whispered to the gathering darkness, to the man who had unknowingly given her the greatest gift of all. Not a home or a fortune, but a chance to become the person she was always meant to be. Jake glanced at her but said nothing. Some things did not need to be spoken aloud. They were understood in the silence between people who had shared blood and fire and victory. The night deepened, and lights began to glow in the windows of the ranch buildings. Laughter drifted from the bunkhouse where some of the hands were playing cards. In the barn, someone was singing an old frontier ballad, their voice carrying on the cool air. Catherine Miller, once a widow from Boston with nothing but letters and hope, now stood as one of the most respected ranchers in Wyoming Territory. The land that had greeted her with ashes had become fertile ground for something new, something lasting. And somewhere in the mountains, where the last of the raiders' camp had been burned to the ground, wildflowers were beginning to grow, nature reclaiming what men had defiled, turning destruction into beauty. The cycle of death and rebirth, of ashes and renewal, was complete. But the story, Catherine knew, was far from over. There would be new challenges, new threats, new battles to fight. The frontier was unforgiving, and the work of building something good and true never truly ended. But she was ready for it. They all were. Together they had proven that ordinary people with extraordinary courage could change their world. That lesson would echo through the territory for generations to come. As Catherine turned to go inside to join her friends for the evening meal, she looked back one last time at the land spreading out before her. This was her kingdom now, built from ashes and determination, watered with blood and tears, and growing stronger every day. The mail-order bride had found only ashes, it was true, but from those ashes, she had built something that would stand for 100 years, and that, she thought with deep satisfaction, was legacy enough for anyone. The door closed behind her, and the ranch settled into the night, peaceful and secure. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new opportunities. But tonight, there was food and friendship, warmth and safety. Tonight, they had earned their rest. And tomorrow, they would build again.